Hey guys, welcome back to the video. In this video, you guys my spoiler-free review of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Finding out that he has burned through 8 of his 9 lives, Puss sets out on an epic journey, encountering evil fairy tale creatures and myths while trying to find the mythical last wish to restore his 9 lives. I want to let you guys know, I was 8 years old when this movie first came out. I watched it in theaters, and now 11 years later, I got to watch Puss in Boots: The Last Wish at 18 years old, and I'm gonna be honest, I absolutely love this movie. Before I get into all of my thoughts on Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, as always, if you are new in here and you enjoy all my movie and TV show reviews, reactions, and breakdowns, make sure to subscribe and notification on so you don't miss any time I upload a video or go live. But don't wasting more time, let's get into it. I want to start off though by talking about how this movie is not a cash grab in my opinion at all. It's very deep, it's very thoughtful, it is thought-provoking, and even though I did have some problems with the humor, I think overall it's still very humorous and it's entertaining at the end of the day. And I kind of want to circle back to the deep and thoughtful part, and I'm going to go into specific themes in just a second here, but I wasn't really expecting for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, a sequel that came out 11 years after the original, to be deeper than the original, to be more thought-provoking than the original. But I think what the people making this movie understood was that, okay, this could be a cash grab, but if we just sprinkle in these themes and these actual ideas that not just kids can relate to, but more so adults, and things that adults can understand, they can not only kind of look past the childish humor and all of the childish elements to actually appeal to that child audience, but they can actually feel some sort of deeper connection to this movie. And I'm going to be honest, that's exactly what happened for me here. I want to get into the themes of this movie because that's where I feel like I connected with the movie most. And this is definitely going to be a lot more of a personal thing. If you don't think about these themes or you don't have any connection to these themes, I don't think this movie is going to be for you, because it also does have humor for 8-year-olds. So if you don't like the humor and you're not really connecting with the themes, I don't see what you can really attach to in this movie per se. I'll talk about the animation at the end of this video because I know that's a huge part of this discussion around this movie, and the animation is absolutely gorgeous. But even above the animations, the theme really worked for me, and there are two main ones. Firstly, that you should make the most of this life that you have because you only have one of them, and you should live your life like you only have one, so you cherish every single moment. Like I said in the synopsis of this movie, Puss is on his last life here. He's burned through 8 of his 9 lives, and the whole point of this movie is for him to try to get to the last wish and make some more. And I'm going to get to the second one in just a second because that does kind of go into my understanding of the theme and my connection to it. But a lot of us are really scared to do something because it's our only life, and that's kind of what Puss goes through in this movie. And I don't want to spoil his character arc because I think that's one of the most entertaining and interesting parts of this movie. But the way that his vision transforms throughout this movie, and the way that this premise is crafted around granting one wish to change this one life they are in, and how other characters are also influenced by it, I think it's the perfect premise for a movie that's coming out 11 years after the first. It's just fresh enough, it's just different enough, and it also appeals to just the right audience to have a difference than just the first movie. The second theme here is about confronting death, and this is definitely more of a basic one, the more surface level, okay, death is here, what are you doing? But in this movie, it's literally a physical threat of death. The big bad wolf, as you guys can see in the trailers, is basically incarnation of death. He is the physical version of death that is chasing Puss in Boots. He's a bounty hunter going for Puss in Boots. And there's a lot more to the story, and I don't think the big bad wolf is technically the quote villain, but he is the main antagonizing figure. There's a bunch of stuff that goes on at the end of the movie that I think works really well, especially with the revelations made with Puss in Boots' character. And again, I don't want to spoil any of that kind of stuff, but I think the way that they play out death here and making death a physical threat and making him actually genuinely a scary figure in this kid's movie. It's not that it's a horror figure, it's not that it's blood, it's not that it's all these things. It's just an unsettlingly dark character. He's just a big wolf with 2 knives in his hands going after Puss in Boots, showing up in random places because he is death. He can literally do whatever he wants to kill you. And the fact that this message is so ingrained in this movie, I mean, it's obviously because of that main premise, but involving the physical version of death here was the absolute perfect choice in my opinion. And at least for me personally, I haven't had a death experience. I haven't experienced passing. I haven't really first-handedly actually have to understand what actually comes with dealing with death, and neither has Puss in Boots in this movie. And so having that connection of not really understanding what it means but the fact that you know it's there is something that I really loved about this movie. And the way that they visualize it here is just perfect. Speaking of like our hero confronting death, I think that's the main thing that I like so much about this movie, is the way that they characterize Puss in Boots to actually confront death. So that's the next thing I want to talk about, is this flawed hero that we get in this movie. Because in the first one, Puss in Boots was always like a fearless hero, and even in the Shrek movies, he was a fearless hero because he had 9 lives. And I think having and seeing this character transition over time, and I'm going to talk about the Shrek universe at the end of this video because I thought it was very cool how they are expanding this universe, both thematically but also just character-wise and stuff like that. I think what's interesting about this flawed hero thing that they bring in is it really puts into perspective how many risks you take as a person. And obviously with this character, Puss in Boots, we've seen the absolutely insane stuff that he's done throughout all of these movies. And I was thinking back to the first Puss in Boots movie with the climax and all that stuff with Humpty Dumpty and all these other fairy tale things. And it is a flawed hero type of story, but it's more on the Humpty Dumpty side of it because he's more of the villainous character. But in this movie, we know that Puss in Boots isn't invincible, whereas in the first one, we know he's invincible. He repeatedly says, I have 9 lives, I have 9 lives. So it's something where we know there is a countdown here, and so does our character. I'm not going to give any context around the scene because it's only like a screenshot that you see in one of the TV spots, but there is a scene where Puss sees all 8 of his other lives. And that really put the movie into perspective for me, trying to actually understand like the actual themes, the actual messages, because it is pretty much just laid out there from the beginning. I mean, from the first like 15 minutes of this movie, you understand the premise. You know, it's a kid's movie. They got to lay everything out for you. But then when you put those lives into perspective and you actually see all of these different versions of himself, and the character sees it, and the character has to outgrow the fact that, okay, I'm not going to fight death head on, but I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'm not going to tell you guys because it's a spoiler. But I think the realization that him seeing all of his other lives had on him was really, really cool and very unique. And I also quickly want to speak on the other characters in this movie, because I feel like a lot of times with children's animated movies, you have your main character, and then you have side characters that are just there to be side characters, to be pretty much merchandising, right? But in this movie, Kitty Softpaws and then the dog, I don't know what they call him specifically. I think they call him Perro throughout the entire movie, but I don't know what his actual name is. But these 2 characters have their own 100% valid reasons to make the last wish. And I think there's obviously character development and understanding why they do or don't and what decisions they make. But I think the fact they all have actual compelling reasons that I think the audience can actually get behind. Like, I might say, okay, Puss should make the last wish. Someone else might say the dog. Someone else may say Kitty Softpaws. Everyone has their own reason to do what they do, and everything is valid. I think and even this isn't just the case for just our main 2 characters. I'm going to talk about villains and antagonists in just a second here, because I think what this movie does so well is it creates all of this stuff surrounding the last wish. And the last wish is that thematic thing of death, life, bringing everything back that you love, maybe having to let go of some things, making use of what you have to the best of your ability. There's so much surrounding just this one last wish. And I think the fact that they explore these backgrounds of these characters so much within just like an hour and 45 minutes of runtime is just so awesome. Dog and Kitty Softpaws have very, very dark backstories, and Softpaws isn't as touched on in this movie because we've already seen a lot of it in the first Puss in Boots movie, which granted was 11 years ago, and I was wondering how a lot of people would even remember it because I rewatched Puss in Boots before this, so that's how I actually remembered all this stuff, but I probably wouldn't have remembered if I didn't rewatch it. So I think it's a little bit just like very generic with Kitty Softpaws' character, but again, we've already seen it before. The dog, by the way, is very sad. It's a very happy character that just disguises all of this pain, and the way that they unravel it throughout this movie is so great, and the effects that it has on Puss in Boots and Kitty Softpaws and the rest of these characters, it's all so well done. At the end of the day, I just think all of the characters emotionally feel right for this story, and that also goes with the villain and the antagonist. I think they all have a pretty valid motive. Even the big bad wolf, Death himself, I think for the reasoning and the changes that Puss in Boots has to make, I think the big bad wolf and the representation of him is really, really well done. And I think it makes a lot of sense why they chose these antagonists. So from the trailers, you can obviously see you have the 3 bears and Goldilocks, as well as the big dude. I keep forgetting his name. He's the one that sticks his thumb in the pie. So these are our antagonizing figures, and not everyone is the main villain, of course, because there's only one main villain. Technically, there's 2 main villains, but I don't know. It's hard to talk about it without giving spoilers away. So so I'm not going to say anything too specific. But my favorite motive outside of like the main three characters is Goldilocks and the Three Bears, because what is originally just a tale that could be very generic and fantasy movies, I think they make a really compelling story and a compelling argument for Goldilocks to make this last wish. And that whole family dynamic was very interesting to me. I do believe it was a little bit kiddie, dumbed down, but that's just going to happen with a kid's movie. I also think all of these motives fall into the categories of the themes that we have in this movie very, very well. Like I said before, I just think everything lines up between motives, characters, ideas, themes. All these things intertwine so well, especially for a movie that's just like an animated movie for kids. Speaking of the animation, we have to talk about the style of this movie. And obviously, first thing you notice when you watch the trailer, oh, it's the Into the Spider-Verse style. And I agree. I mean, I think it's a great style, and I'm glad they did it. It's, if I'm not mistaken, it's 3D animation with 2D style, as well as other just drawn-on things, like whenever they swipe their swords, there's little marks on the side, and it just accentuates all of these other movements, which I think is really cool. I really like the Into the Spider-Verse style, and I really like, and this is, again, I'm pretty much just praising Into the Spider-Verse at this point, but it 100% deserves it. A lot of times, 3D animation is photorealistic at this point. It's kind of what Pixar did with The Good Dinosaur. And so with across Into the Spider-Verse, they were kind of backtracking on that, going back. And I think for Into the Spider-Verse, it makes a lot of sense. Spider-Man is a comic book character, the introductions, everything was themed in a comic booky way. The last movie I would think it actually using the Into the Spider-Verse style is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, yet let alone just any Shrek universe spin-off movie. And I'm going to talk about the Shrek universe in just a second here. But I just think the fact that they used it here was, first of all, unique, but also how well they used it. It felt much more useful compared to another movie this year that tried to do a little bit, The Bad Guys. It wasn't necessarily 100% going for that 2D style and 3D animation, but it kind of made its way towards that through the runtime of the movie. And so I thought that this movie used it very well. It does these great background tricks, the motion lines, the anime style really well, and it's not overused. And I think it accentuates what it accentuates. I think the character designs work really well, especially the Big Bad Wolf. He looks phenomenal in this animated form, and also Goldilocks. All these stylistic choices, they do so much and are so creative with what they can pull off with this style, and I think it works really well. I don't think it should be labeled as an Into the Spider-Verse copycat. They definitely took inspiration from the style, but it's not necessarily all 100% influence. There's a lot of uniqueness added to it through the action and emotional moments. They do a lot of great stuff with the style, and I really like how they utilized it, because it wasn't a one-for-one copy. They actually made it unique. But now I want to quickly just talk about my little issue with the movie that I quickly mentioned earlier in this video, and that is I just don't think all the humor lands for me. But at the same time, I'm not 8 years old. I'm not the target audience for this movie, so I don't expect all the humor to land for me. But that's also why I can't give it like a perfect score. I'm gonna give you guys my final score for this movie in just a second, but again, I'm just not the age range for this movie. So even this review in general, if you're taking your kid to go see it, don't listen to this review. Just go take them to see it. It's a great animated movie for children. But if you're an adult, I don't think the humor is going to land for you all the time, but I do think you're going to be wowed by the animation. You're going to be wowed by the fact of how deep this movie actually is and how many themes you might actually relate to. So at the end of the day, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish really surprised me. I was blown away by almost every single thematic element of this movie, and though a little bit of the humor didn't really work for me, I think at the end of the day, this movie is still 100% worth the watch in theaters. I'm giving Puss in Boots: The Last Wish an 8.5 out of 10. I am so excited for everyone to check out this movie because it's one of my favorite movies of the year. Comes out in theaters December 21st, and if you've seen or want to check out Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, let me know your thought of it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.